In this video, we're going to take a look at several text functions in Excel and how we can use them to help extract data on the left, in the middle, and to the right with certain parameters. And this would be very helpful for cleaning up reports, adding additional columns that we might want to do for analysis, or just pulling out information that we're going to need to use in other places. So to go through some of these examples, we're going to look at ways to pull out the left, right, and middle values in this data. And for our first example, let's say we want to pull out the left 3 characters of our item ID column. And we can start by typing left, clicking on A4, the item ID column we're interested in. And in this case, since we can see that there's only 3 characters to the left that we're interested in before we hit the dash, we can enter 3. And then we can pull this down and see that we extracted just the first 3 characters to the left. Now, one of the things with this, if we know that it'll always be 3 characters, that's easy, but there's going to be cases where, what if it's not always the same amount of characters? How can we make this more dynamic? Well, we can use the left function again, and in this case, the text we're interested in is our item description. And let's say we want to pull everything to the left of the parentheses. So the text we're interested in is before over here. And we'll get to the number of characters. We're going to need to tell Excel when we want to find data to the left. And in this case, we want to look for their first parenthesis and then take everything to the left of that. In order to do that, we can start by typing in find. And the text we want to find is that first parenthesis. And we want to find that within before. We'll start on the first time we find it. And then we'll close that. And we'll enter -2, and we'll go through why in a second, and we'll close out this formula. And we'll pull this down. And we can see that now dynamically pulled everything to the left. And the reason we entered -2 is that the first parenthesis, it finds, if we don't take 2 characters to the left of it, we'd be left with the space and a parenthesis. So that's just letting Excel know that we need to remove those 2 characters in order to keep just what's to the left, excluding the space and that first parenthesis. Now there's another function in Excel that's a lot easier to use for this, and that's the text before function. And we can type in text before. Text we're interested in is before. And the delimiter, so where we want to grab the text before, is going to be that first parenthesis. And we can close that. And here you can see that we get the same result. Now, similar to what we ran into with this one, this is grabbing the text before the parenthesis, so there is a space after these. So if we copy and paste that, we can see that if we look into our formula bar here, that there is an extra space at the end. So an easy way to take care of that in this instance would be to wrap this in a trim function, which removes all extra trailing spaces, and we can pull this down. So the data will look the same, but if we ever were to try to match exact values, that space might cause some issues. Now we can do a very similar thing with our right function. And let's say we just want the right 2 characters. So in this case, we just want these last 2 characters in our item ID. We can select our item ID column. We can enter 2, since we just want those last 2 characters. We can see that's consistent throughout our data. And if we pull that down, we get those right 2. Now we've run into the same issue of what if there were different lengths of characters? How can we make this more dynamic? And so let's say we want to pull just the data that's in the parentheses from our item description. So how can we dynamically do that? So we can use our right function, and we want the right of this. And what we're going to want to include here is first looking at the length of this entire cell, so how many characters are in that. Then we're going to subtract when we find our first parenthesis. And we're finding that within before. And for the issue that we ran into at the left, we're going to want to add one character to get rid of the space, and then close that. And if we pull this down, we see that we've dynamically pulled everything to the right of the parenthesis and then added that character just to make sure we didn't include that space. Now there's also another handy function in Excel, the TEXTAFTER function. So let's say we're looking at our supplier column and we just wanted everything after the @ sign. So that in this case would be our delimiter. You can close that and pull this down. In that case, no matter how many characters were to the left of that, we would just be able to dynamically find the @ sign and take everything to the right. Now we can look at a few examples of how we pull data with in between characters. So let's start back at our item ID column and want to pull the data between the two dashes. So in this case, we can do a more manual way. So we can do the mid function. Text is going to be A4. And since we know that the dash in this case is our 5th character that we find, we can start it at the 5th character. And then the number of characters we're interested in taking is the 2 in between. So we can close that and pull this down. One thing we'll notice once again is that since this is not dynamic, once the character number switches from 2 to 3 in the middle, we would need to update this formula to account for taking the 3 characters in the middle. So it brings us once again to how do we make this more dynamic? Now, using a more dynamic mid function, this first example is going to be a little bit more complicated using the left, mid, find, and length function all in combination. Then we'll go through an easier way to do the same thing. So let's say we want to dynamically pull these middle item ID tags here. So we can start by typing our left function, and then we can go to our mid function, and we want to find the text over here, which is A4. In this case, we want to find our dash, and we're finding that within A4. And then we're going to add one character, and we'll come back to explaining that one in a second. And then for our number of characters, we're going to be looking at our length of this text string. And then we want to find our another instance of our dash. And within that, we're going to use the mid function again. Mid of A4. And we're going to start that when we find our dash within A4. Then we'll add a character. And then to round it out, we're going to do the length of A4. And then subtract one character and close that. And let's pull this down and see if we got it. And there we can see that this formula is dynamically pulling the middle. So for this, it'd be good to pause and go through this formula in practice. Essentially what we're doing is finding the first instance of the dash, which is leaving us with D3 through CC. Then we're finding the second instance of the dash, and then we're taking everything to the left of that. So this is a little bit more of a complex formula to work out. So what's an option that would make this a lot easier? And that's using both the text before and text after functions, which we just took a look at. So we start by typing text before, and then go into text after. And the text after the text we're looking for, once again, is in 8.4. In this case, we're looking for the text both after the dash and then the text that is before the dash. Close that and pull this down and get the same result. So this one is a lot easier. So just looking at the text before and after the dashes or whichever characters we're interested in. Now, one more handy function is if there is a column with certain delimiters that we want to split into cells, we can use the text split function. And in this case, we want to split these into 3 different columns. You could hit that for 8.4. And the column delimiter, so what we want to break the columns by, will be our dash. And close that function. And there we can see that we have all these broken out into each its own unique column. So hopefully that was helpful, going through how to extract text to the left, to the right, in the middle, ways to make that dynamic in case there's different number of characters for each scenario. So hope that helps out for your data reporting, for analysis, and working in your spreadsheets.